Hello, my name is Jade King. This is my psychotherapist video presentation. I'll be focusing on cognitive behavioral theory. This slide contains a list of techniques that was discussed with the client in my video. We went over different techniques such as thought journal, exposure therapy, cognitive reconstructing, and routine and schedule. Our timeline of events were in this sequence. First, we discussed thought journal, followed by routine and schedule. Next, exposure therapy. And lastly, cognitive reconstructive thoughts. In the video of my therapy session recording, thought journaling was discussed at about a minute 55. The client stated that they were having issues with stress regulation, mainly due to work, such as a video presentation interaction that they had, as well as the constant overwhelming feeling of getting work done in a timely manner. My suggestion originally is thought journal, which helps break the cycle between thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Its main purpose is to increase self awareness, detect cognitive distortions, build skills to reframe negative thoughts, and encourage reflection and emotional processing. Thought journaling is brought up at the beginning of the session, originally when discussing the beginning of their treatment plan. It is also touched on at the end of the session in order to encourage the client to review an example. That way, it did not feel overwhelming. Thought journal consisted of a easy format, such as identifying the situation, their automatic thoughts associated with the situation, the emotions experienced during the situation, followed by the cognitive distortion balanced thought, which is kind of reframing the negative thought or reaction into a functional thought pattern that allows them to better deal with the situation they are identifying. Next, we discussed routine and scheduling. Because this individual was specifically having issues with balancing their home life and work life, routine and scheduling can help break down their day into smaller consecutive sequences so that they are not overwhelmed by the entirety of the day, but rather taking several small steps to get through each event that they will experience that day. Why routine matters in cognitive behavioral theory is predictability reduces cognitive overload. It encourages healthy habits such as sleep, hygiene, exercise, and it disrupts avoidance behaviors and builds a sense of accomplishment. Routine and schedule. An activity schedule usually involves planning positive, goal oriented tasks. The behavioral activation uses structured activities to combat depression. A sleep and meal routine regulating biological rhythms uses a weekly routine planner or behavior chart image, such as thought, feeling, behavior, routine, feedback loop. This was suggested to the client who stated that she wakes up many mornings feeling that she immediately needs to open her eyes and begin work. She needs to immediately check emails and fall in the routine of getting to work as quickly as possible to where she's no longer taking care of her own needs. So, the suggestion of this routine and also kind of inserting personal care into that work routine allows to alleviate some of the anxiety surrounded by the constant overwhelming feeling of having to get stuff done occupationally. Third was exposure therapy, introduced to this client to help decrease anxiety through repeated exposure. Avoidance really maintains fear because The thoughts of fear will keep the individual from doing something to the point that fear becomes the controlling factor, while confrontation leads to desensitization and cognitive reconstructing. Our client who was having a hard time figuring out how to balance themselves and their life were avoiding stuff that would specifically benefit them personally rather than just the benefit of their company. I think small exposure therapy would assist the client with gaining this balance. Throughout our session, we continually discussed exposing her to new situations and schedules where her mental health, hygiene, and overall well being was placed before work, not to ignore responsibility, but to make sure the individual has a safe foundation um, in order to continue providing the work that she does. The steps of this exposure therapy was to identify the fear hierarchy, which was not being capable or maintaining the workflow. It created an exposure plan of gradually introducing the idea of relaxing and finding personal time using the schedule. Practice repeatedly is to maintain that schedule while being exposed to these new ideas, to track anxiety levels through her journal while testing out this new schedule to see if it fits into her life and actually does create a work balance, and to process and reframe. Our following session would be conducted to review her journal as well as to discuss what techniques work and what techniques did not work in order to improve that balance and kind of relieve her overwhelming feeling of not being able to balance life. On a more personal level, but still related to work, because we were discussing her work and home life balance and the anxiety surrounding it, the client did open up about her automatic thoughts to disregard her capabilities and to talk down to herself. The idea of cognitive reconstructing, which could be identified while she's journaling, was brought up so that she could take the thoughts that she would not be good enough in her presentation for work, or that she would not complete the task that she needed to, and reframing the idea of not being capable to being capable in a timely pace, being capable to do so because of her years of hard work. Instead of immediately going to a situation to where she would degrade herself, in fact, to switch it not to a complete opposite, overly happy thought that would feel unrealistic, but rather a more functional and self aware thought that no longer focused on the negative of the situation. Again, the use of cognitive behavioral theory, all of these techniques are intertwined and broken down for the client in order to kind of help them not only identify the routine that works best for them, but also to figure out how to functionally shape their thoughts in order to reduce anxiety and depression while going along with their daily life. Sorry. Cognitive reconstruction. The steps in cognitive reconstruction were for her to identify the negative thought, such as the thoughts she was having surrounding her workplace meeting, to examine her surroundings and or the evidence of, is this negative thought adequate or is it just kind of self-derogatory, to challenge that thought with a more positive, functional, ideal or viewpoint of the current situation she's in, and to over time be able to generate a balanced alternative thought and reflect on the emotional change. Did the thought help decrease the anxiety rather than increase the anxiety of the overwhelming roller coaster of feeling inadequate? This slide contains my reflection of this experience. I found myself overly thinking about how to conduct the counseling session. Once recording with the actual individual who was my client, which I greatly appreciate all of her assistance, I found myself overly rushing, talking very fast, and I ended up pacing myself more quickly. I realized after our call that there was more that I could have said or had planned to say when I let my own anxiety get in the way of completing this session. This was a practice session, of course, at this time while in school. I am not an actual therapist or counselor, but it is great practice to take into consideration when pursuing the career further of readying myself for clients and also preparing myself to take stuff at a slower pace, as well to give the client plenty of time to speak and to dive in deep on any type of routine or technique that I'm introducing to them, practicing it in said session so that they don't feel like I've thrown a bunch of words at them without being able to functionally use it or show them how to use it. It was a great experience, and I appreciate the time that I've had. The following slide contains the video of our counseling session. I hope you've enjoyed my presentation as well as the attached video following this. And thank you so much for your time. Hi, it's good to see you again. How have you been feeling since our last session?
Hey, I've been okay. I guess a little more anxious this week than this week, especially at work.
Well, thank you for sharing that. When you say more anxious, what does that look like for you?
Mostly just racing thoughts. Like I'll be working on something and suddenly feel overwhelmed. Like everything needs to be done at once, or I'll mess up and it's hard to focus.
That sounds really distressing. It's like your mind gets into overdrive, and before you even realize it, you're stuck in an anxious cycle.
Exactly. Sometimes I don't notice how tense I am until hours later.
Mhm. That's a common experience with anxiety. It tends to sneak up on us. Is there anything specific you would like to focus on for today's session?
Yeah, maybe how to manage that anxiety when it hits me during the day. I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm spiraling because before I even notice it's happening.
I think that's a really great focus for today. I think this ties well into your treatment plan, and I can walk you through it. We'll be using more core techniques from cognitive behavioral theory, and it'll help you understand and kind of manage those spirals. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Good. So, a brief overview of your plan. We can adjust it based on how you're feeling, and it gives you a solid framework, and we can work from there. So, our first one will be a thought journal. We can begin by tracking your thoughts, especially when anxiety spikes. The goal is to kind of jot down what happened, what you're thinking, and what you're feeling in those moments so we can see how you respond. And that'll kind of help us identify patterns and thoughts that might be fueling the anxiety you're feeling.
So, like during an anxious moment, I'd stop and write things down.
Yes, or even shortly after, the moment you have a free moment. Sometimes it's too overwhelming in that moment to add on writing something. What matters is getting into the habit of kind of noticing so that you're able to catch yourself in that moment. We can think back to any anxious moments from the past week that's happened to you.
Okay, yeah. So, like on Tuesday, I had to present in a team meeting, and I kept thinking I'd mess up or forget something important.
I mean, that's a great example. Did you notice any changes or feeling in your body during that time?
My heart was racing
Yeah.
and I felt hot. My
hmm
hands were shaking a little too.
Well, I thank you for sharing that. That's exactly what we want to capture in our journal. In this situation, the thoughts, the emotions, and the physical sensations, over time, that'll kind of help you gain insight and distance yourself to help you deal with those anxious situations. We can also try something like a routine and schedule, especially with a work schedule. We can look at your daily structure, like sleep and meals, and when you give yourself a break. And that routine can kind of stabilize your brain and reduce those unknown anxiety triggers.
Okay. I've been skipping meals and staying up really late as well. Uh, that probably doesn't help, huh?
It's definitely not uncommon, especially when you're feeling overwhelmed. But you're right, it can increase your anxiety actually. Thinking of your routine like a foundation. If it starts to get shaky, everything else feels more and more unstable.
Okay. Yeah, mornings are rough. I
Mhm.
usually just roll out of bed and start checking emails right away.
Well, that's really helpful to know. I mean, we can start with small tweaks. For example, building in a 5-minute window in the morning when you wake up before the emails, just for you to ground yourself. How does that make you feel?
That's helpful to sorry, honestly, that sounds kind of nice, like a pause button.
Right. We can also incorporate with your anxiety exposure therapy. It kind of sounds intimidating at first, but exposure therapy basically it means slowly and safely confronting those situations that are causing your anxiety so you can build resilience and a bit more confidence for when you face the situation again.
Okay, so like if I'm anxious about presentations, I'd start by practicing in front of a mirror or something?
Exactly. So maybe in front of one or two trusted friends or even in the mirror, and then step by step, you can kind of build into being in a larger group. Um, Reconstructing or shaping your thoughts in those moments, a good part to think about is kind of weaving into the others. Cognitive reconstructing, it means taking those negative and unhelpful thoughts that come up and learning to kind of challenge and reframe them into providing confidence for yourself.
Like when I tell myself I'm going to totally mess everything up.
Exactly. Instead of letting those thoughts spiral in you, we can cause a pause and ask ourselves, is that thought true? Does it help you in that time of need? Or is there a balance that we can find? So instead of, I'm going to mess this up, you can kind of shift it into, I might be nervous, but I can prepare one step at a time.
Yeah, I do jump to the worst case scenarios a lot.
That's very common, and we can definitely work on these things together. Before we dive deeper, though, do you have any questions about any of these techniques or how you feel that they might work for you?
No, not at this time. Oh, you know what? It actually sounds helpful, more active than I expected, but I like the idea of doing something concrete.
Well, that's really good to hear. Cognitive behavioral therapy is very hands on between therapist and client. Between these sessions, you'll have new tools to try out, and then we can kind of discuss and reflect on whether they're working for you or if we need any changes made. We can definitely start with a thought journal, and I'll walk you through how to use it so that it's not overwhelming when you really need it.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
All right. Well, a really simple format would be if you take a piece of paper, you're going to write out 4 columns. That way you know the situation and how it's happening, your thoughts, what's going through your mind when you're getting anxious, your emotions and how you feel, and your response. What happens next after all of these feelings? We can take, for example, the situation you described on Tuesday with your meeting. I think it'll be a great start. How do you feel about the idea of writing it out and then us talking about it later?
Honestly, I think it is a little weird at first, but kind of relieving too.
hmm
I can see the thoughts instead of being stuck in them.
Right. Well, that's the goal. We're going to keep practicing this skill. For this week, I would just like you to try and write down at least one moment, possibly per day if you're comfortable with that. No pressure to get it perfect, but just stuff you notice, a small step to start through everything.
Okay, I can try that.
Yeah, well, that's great. Next time, we'll review your journal together. We can kind of explore those patterns that show up, and we might also take a closer look at your routines. That way, we can change it and help you with your mornings more. Is that a good plan for you?
Thank yes, definitely.
Well, good. I'll see you next week. And remember, you're building awareness, it's not perfection, and that's where all the change begins.
Alrighty, thanks. See you next week.
See you next week.